and and a scientist, obviously. And now you're writing a book, or you've written a book, co-authored, on psyops. And so the transition is what it's all about for, your authorship of this. You go from that medicine and you arrive at psyops. So why don't you first, for those who don't know that story, tell about that transition?
Okay, so let's talk about the origin of the book and how did I get and it's not just me. Remember, it's me and my partner of over 50 years now, Dr. Jill Glasspool Malone. And just to frame that up a little bit, Jill's PhD is in immunology, biotechnology, and public policy. Her PhD thesis was actually focused on the NIH peer review system. And she did an internship at Research America, which is a lobbying firm based in DC that is focused on supporting the research enterprise, biomedical research enterprise. So that's Jill's background. And before that, she was trained as an undergraduate as a biological anthropologist, among other things. So spent a lot of time working in the San Diego Zoo and the Brookfield Zoo, particularly with non-human primates and looking at non-human primate behavior. So that's her background. She approaches everything from the framework of basically being an anthropologist, a modern anthropologist trained at UC San Diego. So we're a bit of a pair. We wake up in the morning talking about policy and the latest news and everything else. And we have experienced this road. And by the way, this isn't this COVID crisis situation. Not only is not my first outbreak, I think I've been at the tip of the spear on 5 or 6 of these. I wrote about some of my experiences in the Ebola outbreak, West African Ebola outbreak, the other day in my essay calling for the resignation of Dr. Tedros from his Director General position at the World Health Organization. So I've been involved in infectious disease research, vaccine research, biotechnology, and biodefense for most of my career. And um, this goes back to my earliest days as an undergraduate, working in a lab focused on a retrovirus and its effects in causing breast cancer in mice. And that laboratory was really at the very forefront at UC Davis of the earliest work relating to the role of the retrovirus we now call HIV in the disease called AIDS. Of course, UC Davis is just down the road from San Francisco, which is one of the major centers for that outbreak. So that's kind of a key history there. I, as an undergraduate, was fascinated with political science. It was kind of like my hobby thing to meet the social studies requirements while I was busy banging my head against trying to learn everything about biochemistry and organic chemistry and calculus and everything else as part of my technical education to get my degree in biochemistry. So I've always had an awareness and fascination with political science, particularly with transnationalism, as a trend that was just emerging, at least in around me in the early 1980s when I was getting my bachelor's degree. Since and then this is not my first rodeo as a whistleblower. Also, I kind of destroyed my academic career consciously as a gene therapy researcher and a genetic vaccine researcher in the 1990s when I went public with what I knew concerning the death of young Mr. Jesse Gelsinger at the hands of Jim Wilson, Dr. Jim Wilson at UPenn. That was a seminal moment in the history of gene therapy and really tanked the entire endeavor. And I was advised by the person training me in bioethics at the time that I had, based on what I told to him that I knew about what was going on, that I had a moral obligation to share my insights with public and particularly with press. And so that was a deep, gulp. Here we go. Uh, and um, and that led to a major turning point in my career. I really no longer had a viable academic career after that.
So you've
So
been willing,
uh,
in this day and age, we all understand what the kind of sacrifice so many people are willing to take. Not all of us, or
mhm,
but you've put it on the
subset.
line before. Of course, I'm thinking of
Yeah,
President
yeah,
or President-elect Donald Trump, and of course it's all interrelated with deep state and the control of information and the fight against anybody who is going to challenge the control of a deep state, the administrative state, um,
yeah.
global
Matrix. Hence,
entities that.
hence the title of the book or the subtitle, "Enforcing the New World Order."
But back to what you
Uh,
were saying, I just wanted to point out that you've put your career on the line. You've taken
oh,
uh, many times, and or at least sometimes, and but that leads us all to those
so
experiences inform what you do next.
yeah, so one of the things I've learned from my personal history is that you can, if you have the courage and wherewithal, you can speak out against the approved narrative. You can be a whistleblower and still survive it. And the one of the ways that you survive it is by having a network of colleagues that understand you and have trust in you and will support you after you go through the transition where you uh, end up blowing up some aspect of your career by speaking out. And they tend to catch you. Uh, I use the metaphor sometimes of rock and roll mosh pit, where the performer or the singer often will throw themselves onto the crowd, and the crowd will catch them. And I kind of feel like that sometimes. So, in the case of, not that I'm um, comparing myself to the Rolling Stones,
I know, but I'm
but
just trying to see you in those crowds when you were young. I bet your hair was a little longer and you
just
were
a little bit.
crazy.
And I did grow up in the Central Coast of California, and we'll just let that dog lie for
Yeah.
now. So, uh, as and I'm schooled again and again. Anybody involved in clinical research has to go through extensive schooling and training regarding bioethics. And I was formally trained in bioethics and then retrained repeatedly because I was managing clinical research for a variety of entities, including government contractors and private contract research organizations in a variety of areas, regulated areas. And I'm an expert also in regulatory affairs, project management, blah, blah, blah. The full toolkit of how do you get a drug or a product, regulated product, through the FDA to licensure. So that's kind of become one of my core competencies after I blew up my academic career and really could no longer be a research scientist. And so that brings us to the last 4 years, and I got this notorious phone call from Michael Callahan, who still is a professor at Harvard University, but he's also CIA. And I published papers with him before. He's a great source of information and insight, has been in the past. And he had called me on January 4th of 2020, alerting me that there was a novel coronavirus in Wuhan and that it represented a major public health threat and that I should get my team and colleagues wound up to try to focus on developing countermeasures for this. And I got the team focused on repurposing drugs because I thought there was insufficient time to come up with a acceptable vaccine. And the history of coronavirus vaccine development has been horrid. They just failure after failure after failure. So I thought that it was unlikely that effective and safe vaccine could be produced in a timely fashion. And I think history has validated that
Well,
position.
so what you were brought in. It's not that you were out there looking for uh, something to stir up. or create a controversy, and you're brought in, you, because of your background and understanding, you understand that it's going to be very difficult to deal with a vaccine that would actually be safe and effective. And so other people must know the same thing, that
Yeah.
to turn around a
Uh,
vaccine that quickly would be dangerous or almost impossible to do so safely. So then you were looking at repurposing drugs that were already on the market.
Exactly, because that's the fastest way. So I I I have a reputation with various players in the federal government, largely destroyed now, of being really good at pulling together teams to solve complicated problems for the government. I have the full toolkit of how to write the proposals, gather the teams, all that stuff, get things funded. I during even COVID, I captured multiple hundreds of millions of dollars for clients. I've got a track record of capturing, I think it's over $8 billion in federal contracts and grants for clients. So this is part of what I do. And so when Callahan contacted me, by the way, Callahan was the guy that managed the Diamond Princess. He set up the 10 hospitals in New York City. He basically his handler in through the COVID crisis was the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response, Bob Kadlec. So Callahan and he previously has briefed the White House multiple times on infectious disease outbreaks, including the original West African Ebola outbreak. Uh, so so Callahan's an interesting character, and you can't be in biodefense in any kind of a thought leader position without running into CIA people. They're just thick as flies in that area. I'm not CIA, never have been, never worked for DARPA, et cetera, et cetera. All these claims that are circulated about me are just conjecture and they're false. But I do have security clearance, or had security clearance. It's parked right now. It's secret with the DoD. I've been through that process of vetting. The team I wound up focused on very sophisticated methods to identify drug candidates. And we came up with a variety, including famotidine. You may remember people taking Pepsid early on during the COVID crisis. So that was me behind that and my team. And also strongly endorsed use of ivermectin and another agent, an anti-inflammatory called celecoxib, particularly those three in combination. And I got that funded for clinical trials research, unfortunately through the DoD, but the FDA blocked us from doing anything with ivermectin. So that's another branch in the story. But as we're going along focusing on drug repurposing based on my threat assessment that that was the fastest way to save lives. And remember, back then, we were being told that it was a 3.4% case fatality rate based on modeling, which turns out to be a lie. Um, and it's basically the same as Jay Bhattacharya originally estimated it based on his studies around the Palo Alto area, which is a fraction of 1% case fatality rate. So it's like 0.01% or something like that across the board, across all ages. So that wraps in the high-risk groups such as the obese, diabetics, and elderly. It's less than that in youth. In any case, continuing to pursue the drug repurposing, and then the jab got rapidly developed and deployed. And because of work that I did when I was 28 in the late 1980s, that led to a series of patents, some of which are behind me on the wall, I got contacted, and I had this expertise in vaccines, and I was contacted by some people, particularly a former CDC contractor that goes by the pseudonym of Dr. Eakes, who asked me to do a podcast explaining the phenomena of um, uh, enhanced immunologic activity, original antigenic sin, et cetera, that's associated with some vaccines and was associated with the SARS-CoV-2 vaccine. And then a strange thing happened, a kind of a confluence of things. I was asked to be on Brett Weinstein's Dark Horse podcast with Steve Kirsch, where we talked about the data from the Japanese technical authority that had been revealed by Byron Bridle in Canada. I was asked by the person that was publishing Byram's initial analysis, Trial Site News, to do my own analysis of those data, which was basically the regulatory filing from Pfizer to Japan, which was a subset of the regulatory filing to the United States. And Byram had noted a number of oddities and anomalies that didn't make sense. And then I was asked to review it, and I came up with even more. And then I sent it to a regulatory specialist who was even more experienced than me, and he came up with more things. But he didn't want his name on the paper. So that got published in Trial Site News as one of the first really reveals of the lies that we've now come to understand in a deep way.
When was that?
And then
What?
it was shortly after the vaccine was emergency use authorized. So that was fall of 2021. It's all time compression now. So very early on. And then Dark Horse podcast with Kirsch. And then a key thing happened. I was asked by Steve to go on a phone conference on Sunday night long ago with a primary care physician from Canada, from the Toronto area, who was soliciting my help somehow to support him in communicating with Public Health Agency Canada, which is their regulatory group, about what he was observing in his own practice with the deployed jabs in Canada. And he started talking about how he would file these adverse event reports, and then they would get deleted by the government and disregarded, and how the government was coercing and compelling and enticing children to take these products in Canada. And of course, that we all know that story now, the Canadian COVID Care Alliance, Justin Trudeau, the truckers convoy, the whole history of the Canadian heavy-handed authoritarianism relating to the COVID crisis. But Ira asked me, the physician, asked me to, and by the way, he has now been reprimanded for providing early treatment and for providing letters of to allow people to not take the vaccine, and had to go through the training and write the statement that he was contrite for his role in misinformation,
A
etc.
struggle session. He had to admit his guilt.
And it's the classic Canadian government struggle session that Jordan Peterson has been through. Same thing. And so Ira really implored me to help in some way. And I had to say, I have contacts at the FDA, but not in Canada. But what I can do, I woke up the next morning and realized what I could do is write an essay about the bioethics of what was going on. So that was really the first essay about the bioethics of what was being deployed, and the coercion and enticement, and talking about the history of informed consent and bioethics, et cetera. And those things together, the Steve Kirsch, Brett Weinstein podcast, I thought it was incredibly viral. It went out, and a couple million people viewed it. And I got all kinds of text back, particularly from women who were experiencing dysmenorrhea or menometrorrhagia, problems with menstruation or premature abortion, et cetera. All of that was being suppressed at the time and denied. They were considered to be hysteric. Literally, those words were used.
The words were used, hysteric.
Yeah. Right. So these women were considered to be hysteric, that were shedding decidual casts, losing their babies. older women that were postmenopausal suddenly starting to menstruate, all this crazy stuff that shouldn't be happening. Yep. It's all there and was observed early on. They set up a Facebook group to talk to each other, and then Facebook deplatformed them. They were told that they were crazy. Hysteria is an ancient term used to characterize women. The root word hyster relates to the uterus, and so this is literally a craziness from your uterus is the meaning of the word hysteria.
I get it all the
And that
time.
that was what doctors were accusing these women of, that were just reporting these horrible effects of the jab. So then that, of course, led to more podcasts, defamation in the media. Um, Eventually the Stop the Mandates rally, and before the Stop the Mandates rally, this seminal event of being asked to be on Joe Rogan's podcast. Uh,
We
um,
know how powerful being on
oh,
Jim Rogan's
and
podcast is.
supposedly, he's never told me they've never, and by the way, Rogan doesn't communicate with me and his team after that. Um, but yeah, but um, supposedly it went to something like 100 million. I think it was the largest up until the Bobby Kennedy, and then of course the Trump one blew that out of the water. But
Being number 3 to
it,
President Trump is an okay place to be, Robert.
I don't know if that's still the case, but Rogan's pretty big. But we did peg the needle, and Google got alarmed because I said these 3 words: mass formation psychosis, and started editing manually search results having to do with mass formation psychosis that were just swamping Google search engines, and a whole lot of things happened. Then just the attacks came nonstop from corporate media: Atlantic Monthly, Rolling Stone, Business Insider, New York Times, Washington Post, all the usual media, and all kinds of attacks online, on the internet, crazy uh, disruptors and people that were clearly controlled opposition, accusing me of being controlled opposition, etc. And so that experience of speaking truth to power and then having this new technology deployed on me, and trying to make sense out of it, is what eventually led to first the book, The Lies My Government Told Me and the Better Future Coming, and then this book, where we took essays that my wife and I had written on Substack and bundled them together around the common theme of psychological warfare and censorship and propaganda and all that. So this book is a kind of an effort to make sense out of what I personally have experienced and what I've seen other people, as you point out correctly, what I've experienced, while rather rough, uh, doesn't even hold a candle to what President Trump has experienced.
Well, we were talking about other people have experienced. I was making a list from memory, sort of reporters that are being spied on. I mean, we're talking about honest to goodness spyware. Their emails being monitored, direct messages. They've been threatened. They've been jailed. And I just started a little, of course, Catherine Herridge, which you mentioned in the book, and Steve Baker, which was on January 6th. But Tucker Carlson was being spied on for years. And then I think Logan
Logan, yeah.
was gone after. And then we've got uh, Kamala Harris that went after the whistleblower who was exposing the fact that the abortion clinics were organ harvesting. And during the Obama administration, I remember my shock during the Obama administration that they were going after, mainstream media. That really blew my mind. And then, of course, there's the Cash Patels, but I just started doodling that list. That's the tip of the iceberg of just what I remembered off the top of my head. And so when we
Not
talked
to
about,
mention what went down in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the UK, And all of this has been coordinated in a significant way by actual PsyWar units. We didn't make up the word. Um, within U.S. military, Canadian military, British military, Australian military, and New Zealand.
Can I ask you a
Really
question
did.
about that? That was going to be my next question, or actually, I jotted it down that it seemed to me that some of the states, nations that were most hysterical about COVID were part of Five Eyes. I mean, Australia went bat crazy. Well, no pun intended. And
Yeah,
exactly. And Canada and
in Canada.
England were all just insane. And of course,
They still,
yeah,
yeah, PM Starmer is locking people up for tweeting and
sure.
saying things on.
Absolutely. So is that Five Eyes, and you could explain what it is Five Eyes actually creating um, a an ecosystem that is, coordinated? Of course, we know that it's about um, spying, and coordinating those efforts and intelligence, but are they creating this madness as well across these five English-speaking nations? Because there were a lot of European nations that were non-English speaking that didn't go the same direction that England and Australia, the United States went. So,
Yeah, Sweden and Romania in particular. And what's interesting about Sweden and Romania is that they have among the lowest all-cause mortality post deployment of the jab in all of Europe. So there does seem to be a correlation, at least, between resisting the authoritarian policies and the mandates of the jab and health outcomes, positive health outcomes in those countries where the populace was resistant to the messaging and accepting the mandates. They had better health outcomes overall.
well, you
Uh,
mentioned, or Jill and you quote, try to think of who it was at the beginning, but you talk about how free speech, uh, if inhibited free speech, that without free speech, we cannot be innovative. We cannot, because we cannot question anything. And I think, going back to your book, PsyWar, you were attacked, and others were attacked viciously. Your careers were either destroyed, your
still ongoing.
your reputations,
Still have stuff.
yeah, ongoing. You can't publish, you're not gonna get those contracts, you can't be,
Can't even
uh
get bank loans.
have you been debanked?
I well, I'm in a situation where the other day I tried to get a loan on a car, and what I ran into was that it the credit agencies all listed me as having a credit score of 0, and essentially I had to get um, user rates to get a loan on a used car. And the 2 of the 3 credit rating agencies still list me as having a 0 credit rating, even though, I pay all my bills and all that good
We
stuff.
believe that you don't have a 0 credit rating. As a matter of fact, I think you're the only person in the world that I've ever heard that of, be so
Oh, it's actually fairly common, and Mark Andreessen, the guy one of the 2 guys that created Netscape, just did an interview on Rogan in which he specifically talked about how this has become common now, that we really already have a social credit system. It's just surreptitious. People aren't aware of it, but they're in, and I think Jill's prepping up another Substack in which she's going to talk about this. They have a special category for people that are politically sensitive, and if you get that designation, then they won't loan you money, and it's restricted only to conservatives, basically.
well, with the I really wanna talk to Jill as well, and I'd like to ask you a question, um, about the fact that she was involved in the NIH, and, um, here we have the new Trump administration coming in and hopefully going to clean house and do it really well, and She was involved in, what did you say?
Her PhD thesis was on the NIH peer review system.
Yeah, the peer review system. And I have real concerns about how money is used by the federal government to fund certain kinds of research and not fund others. And how, of course, we've seen for decades how we'll find out, even 20 some years ago, I remember reading reports where they're funding research on, toilet seats in Bangladesh, right? And
Yeah.
millions
So,
go
so
there.
this gets right at the core of Bobby's um, uh, position on NIH, that he wants to redirect NIH away from basically supporting the pharmaceutical industry and inventing new drugs and biologics, rather than researching those areas that are very disease-centric. The whole problem we're facing here is that the government HHS R&D enterprise is extremely siloed, and it's siloed around diseases. That's the way NIH is structured. These are each centers for this disease or that disease. And, infectious disease or allergy, drug abuse, it's all siloed. And it's all siloed in a way that emphasizes development of interventions for a disease. So it's very disease-centric. And Bobby wants to refocus it on health. So rather than focusing on developing products for disease, he wants to focus on developing information, knowledge, and technologies, capabilities that will promote health. So that seems
Hence
like a
the name
subtle difference.
National Institute of Health. It seems like that might have occurred to them. Do you know at the beginning when that three-letter agency was created, I suppose by Congress, I'm assuming it was constitutionally mandated, but did they
No, it's
begin?
not constitutionally mandated.
Oh, it
It's
isn't.
so we can go. That's a bit of an aside, but if you want to understand how NIH works, you have to understand pork barrel politics. NIH functionally is a way to direct money mostly to major urban centers and universities, and also to support the pharmaceutical industry, which supports NIH. So the way there's a bunch of derivatives of this. For instance, the director of NIH has very little power. Um, the identified director that's going to fill Francis Collins' position, who's a personal friend, is about to have a little bit of a rough awakening because he really can't control the institutes. The institutes are controlled by Congress. They're line item funded. So Tony Fauci's boss functionally was not the president, nor was it the director of NIH. It's Congress. And the way the ecosystem works is that Congress appropriates money to these various institutes, and the institutes carefully track where that money goes and then reports back to the congresspersons. And that creates a cycle in which various congresspersons can ensure that capital is flowing to their major universities and the jobs that are accrued consequent to that. So that's kind of that
I didn't know
business
that was
cycle
the
there.
background because I had seen and heard and read, of course, for decades that, these projects that are being funded, it's all about pork barrel, as you mentioned, and it's being able to say, I got money for my district, I got money for my state.
Right.
And and that is the
So
opposite
the
of
national
it.
defense that were scattered all over the country in major urban centers, which makes no sense at all, that Boston would have a center for working with highly pathogenic agents akin to the Wuhan Institute of Virology in downtown Boston. But that reflects, um, whose goose is being cooked here. These centers were not placed in ways that made sense in terms of public health or risk management. They made sense in terms of congressional districts. And that's kind of the way the world works in DC, frankly. I'm sorry to say. I wish it was otherwise. And that's so those are the kind of the highest level dynamics of NIH is that, Tony Fauci's budget far exceeds Francis Collins's budget. Tony Fauci, this is why he was able to build such an empire. He's relatively autonomous, and he was really adept as a administrator, if you want to call him a scientist, politician, in wooing key senators and congresspeople to support his institute, in part by ensuring that the goods went back to their respective districts or states. And that's the, like I said, that's the cycle there. And there's
So
little
it's not
tiny versions.
controlled by the executive department. That
No,
the president is not the boss here. So
no.
that's going to
Uh-uh.
be, it's Congress.
Yeah, and so that's Jay Bhattacharya's opportunities to actually implement reform are, let's say, highly limited. Uh, Doge has a mandate with Musk and Ramaswamy to actually have a major impact on these institutes, and I fully support that. I think that they really do need a thorough scrub brush, and the NIH historically has been run by a cadre of people. They're now retiring out that were essentially draft dodgers. They avoided the Vietnam War by going to work for HHS, and the slang that was used to refer to them was they were the yellow berets. Follow the analogy, and so the NIH is basically run by an administrative class that is very liberal, left leaning, and and well said. So that's that ecosystem there, and it is not. I wrote an essay the other day that I've been attacked for as having supported Trump, but it was really fairly critical of the HHS employee appointments that are happening. I don't know how the person that wrote this essay kind of missed the meaning there. Maybe it was too subtle, but I was trying to play nice in the sandbox with the new administration. But uh, um, these people that are being brought in from academe and otherwise that really don't have a lot of experience with the government are highly likely to just get rolled. The entrenched bureaucracy, the senior executive service, etc., is the best metaphor for me as somebody that lives on a farm is they're embedded like ticks. Uh,
Oh my
one such
gosh, I
thing.
used to have to get ticks out of dogs. Yeah, that's
So
really bad.
yeah, they're in prior. You sound like somebody who's followed MAGA and Mr. Trump's career, and so you may be aware that Mr. Trump, with his famous "You're fired," ran into a federal bureaucracy upon his, in the first term, that was highly resistant to being fired. They have their own unions, they have all kinds of policies, et cetera, put in place that makes it extremely difficult to get rid of somebody in either the government service or GS track, or even worse, the senior executive service, the 6,000 plus people that actually run the government. Those ones can't be fired, essentially. They have permanent positions just like a judge.
Did you see
And they're the
what
ones that,
Biden just did with the Social Security Administration, the 42,000 employees?
no, I missed that.
Oh, I don't know if it's an executive order or a contract with the union, but he just put in stone. I say we chip it away anyway or blow it up. 42,000 Social Security Administration employees until 2009 will be able to work from home. It's mandated by whatever method that he took.
Fascinating.
Just did it
Yeah, because
yesterday.
that's exactly the approach that Ramaswamy and Musk are talking about is they basically say, come into work on Monday, and those that don't are out. Um, So Trump tried to reclassify these positions as at-will employed. He managed to get it through the courts just before he lost the election, and put that out as an executive order. And then it was literally the first thing that Biden rescinded when he assumed the presidency. Because Biden and Obama are all about the SES and the executive caste. Obama actually basically did something akin to court packing. He greatly expanded the senior executive service and then staffed it with his people. So they're all embedded all in the government, and they're not going away. It's interesting. Bobby Kennedy basically has 3 chiefs of staff that report to him, assuming he gets confirmed. They're all senior executive service people.
Yeah, tell me
So
about that a little bit more in depth because that's very worrisome and it's in your book. And by the way, I feel as if we've been meandering around. We start off with your story and where I wanted to really leap off from there is now you're talking about psy wars, psyops, freedom of speech and the use of government power, covert power and all these technologies in cooperation with non-government organizations, with corporate America, international organizations, other nations to actually, undermine, to strip us of our constitutional protections, our very way of life, to put us all in a level of serfdom rather than the sovereign individuals that we are. And so that's where you're going with this book. I'm mentioning the SES, because I think what you're talking about is that this control is so embedded that replacing um, uh, staff, management, administration is virtually impossible. Can you explain more the SES?
so the senior executive service as it currently exists was put in place by Jimmy Carter, together with the notable things like the Department of Education. And what the SES, the logic goes back to, I think it was assassination of Taft. One of the presidents that were assassinated was assassinated, I think it was Taft, um, was assassinated because somebody that had worked on their campaign expected to get a appointed position in the new government coming in and didn't get that position. And so they felt slighted um, and decided to assassinate the president. And in response to this, Congress decided that we needed to have some sort of permanent uh, administrative caste that wouldn't be subject to these presidential appointments that are in the plum book. Back in the day, virtually the entire administration would turn over with each new election, and people would work on the campaign in order to get the goodies if their guy won or gal. So that was the way it used to be. Then there was this effort to put in place a more permanent executive leadership caste that would transcend uh, elected leaders, presidents, in the thinking that this would create continuity in government. And then Carter formalized it by creating this senior executive service, which is virtually one is unable to fire them unless they have some moral turpitude problem or some other major breach like espionage for a foreign country. And so, and then that's been expanded, and as I mentioned, was expanded specifically by Obama in a major way, and then that allowed him to pack his employees. Obama operates basically off of the old Chicago political machine model, where again you give out the goodies to those that support your election and are aligned with you politically. It's important to kind of understand where, in order to understand Barack Obama, you have to understand Chicago politics because that's where he comes from, and that's kind of been his metaphor for refashioning the Democratic Party, which is how we got to,
So is this a
Kamala
key point?
Harris.
Because absolutely about Obama, is this a key point, the SES, of the deep state and the administrative state being able
So the
to
SES, when Kash Patel talks about the deep state, there's the deep state and the administrative state, and they're
right.
somewhat different about this in the book. Deep state that Kash describes is more of this insidious network of highly influential DC people that are very much embedded in DoD intelligence and state departments. Administrative state is more the operational bureaucracy, and that's very much the senior executive service. SES has its own flag. It has its own union. The SES are the ones that literally are running the CDC, for example. So if you're pissed off at the CDC, Rochelle Walensky basically mailed it in from New England, as I recall. She didn't live in Atlanta most of the time. She lived up in her nice digs up in New England, and then would broadcast out her missives and send her guidance about whatever it was that Biden wanted. And that was relayed down to the SES that would functionally actually run the CDC. So that's just one example. And so Trump, of course, what happens with the SES is they know all the little tricks and nuances of how to get their way based on the federal government's rules and regulations. And so they're masters at the slow walk. You know, Trump may say, do this, and they say, oh, yes, Mr. Trump, we'll do that when we get around to it. You follow what I'm saying. So they have all kinds of ways to derail
Is that
things.
are we going to be able to, is Trump going to be able to get rid of the SES or Vivek and Elon?
That's a great question, and it relates to Schedule F. So Schedule F was a major insight and threat to the SES and the senior GS service ranks, so 13, 14, 15 people, GS 13, 14, 15. And because people lower than 13 are basically, doing the dirty work and they're not influential. But they're not involved in policy and implementation. But so Trump came up and his team came up with this interesting nuance of reclassifying people to become at-will employees. So create a new column of employment and then just transfer them over into the new column out of the SES column in terms of their rules and regulations for hiring and firing. And that would have worked, except he lost the election, or maybe he didn't lose the election, but it was stolen. But in any case, that wasn't able to be
So he's
accomplished.
going to be able to,
And
first day in office,
hold
reinstitute
on.
that.
No, he's not. What they did was realizing that they had this loophole, this weakness. What they did was then created a whole new body of law and regulation that was specifically designed to make it almost impossible to implement Schedule F again. So they learned from the Schedule F strategy, and they fashioned new policy that they've implemented under Biden to make it extremely difficult for a subsequent Republican administration to go ahead and re-implement Schedule F, such as Mr. Trump coming back into office. So that's one of the challenges he's going to face now in his team, and I'm sure they're talking about it, particularly Ramaswamy and the Doge team, is what the heck happened in the last 4 years, and how are they going to evade the chess match that, this is, they're all playing chess here about how they protect their privilege and maintain their juicy positions. And one of the strategies that's talked about, of course, is relocating these various federal agencies
Out to
out in
flyover country.
just so. And then these privileged folks that are senior in their career that are very embedded
Don't
in
want to leave
Northern.
Georgetown, don't want to leave the high life of inside. They'll just go to, become lobbyists anyways. So They'll retire, become a lobbyist. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, and that happened during the Trump era, or his first term, and I think that they should do that massively. And as a matter of fact, stick them up in Montana. Well, actually, that's a really nice place. There's no offense to that, but I mean, it's got to Montana, but that is one thing. I think also,
How about South Dakota
yeah, there you go.
or North Dakota? Put them all in Fargo.
Yeah, there you go. And it seems to me that also another tactic is to eliminate whole projects and
Yeah.
divisions and the labyrinth.
If it's congressionally mandated. So then you can't really do an executive order to eliminate an agency. What you can do is a lot of times these agencies are written in by Congress in a vague way with a vague mission. And so one strategy may be to look at those congressionally authorized mission statements when they authorize these agencies. And by the way, CDC is not a congressionally authorized agency. Good to know. They never got that formal authorization. They're a great example of mission creep. But what you can basically do is say, okay, you guys you're way off the reservation. You're no longer responsive to your original mandate. And oh, by the way, we have a big stick that's called overturning Chevron deference. And you will now come into compliance with your original mandate. Well, what's that original mandate, sir? Well, it's how we are interpreting it to be based on the congressional language. And so a lot of times that language is so vaguely written that instead of it being tomato, it's tomato. You can redefine the scope and purpose of the agency in a way that's still consistent with the congressional language, so then you don't have to get a new bill passed.
Because we can't
But
we can't rely upon that. But I would say this, that the mandates that were, or the agencies that are created with this vague language, obviously it's done once so that Congress doesn't have to work and be held responsible for votes that are clearly unconstitutional or contrary to the public's will. But also it allows that mission creep, because what's the mission? So the mission creep is expanded. So just reinterpreting it, I mean, that's as simple as can be. Because if they were allowed to
that's one
go,
strategy that Doge could use. And then they could say, well, under this new interpretation of the mission, we have all these superfluous functions. And so we're going to have to cut these programs because they're really not consistent. And by the way, because of Chevron deference, this um, regulation by fiat from the administrative state is no longer valid. And so we have to, I'm sorry, the Supreme Court has forced our hand. We're so helpless. The Supreme Court has forced our hand. And it's not that we want to go against the will of Congress, but unfortunately, the Supreme Court has said that they can no longer legislate through administrative fiat. And so we're going to have to roll back all those regulations because otherwise we're just going to get tied up in the courts, and it's going to be another ambulance chasing situation. And a full employment act for lawyers that want to sue the federal government based on the Chevron deference decision to overturn excessive regulation. And so we might as well just go in and do it ourselves rather than having to wait to be hit by this firestorm of litigation that's going to come at us over the next 10 years. Because this,
eliminate, say,
uh,
3,000 rules, which are actually laws that are not constitutionally passed. But if you eliminate, say, 3,000, good number to me, in one
just to
agency,
wrap
anybody
it up.
who is there to write those rules and oversee
It,
businesses or
yep.
organizations or, states or whatever, if they're no longer, if the rule's no longer there, how do you enforce a law that's, you don't need the law enforcement in essence. Exactly. Exactly. And
As quoting Javier Milei, "E fuerza,
you know that
gone."
when you just mentioned that CDC is not congressionally mandated, I don't think I've heard that before. If I did, I forgot. And so
Yeah.
let me just quickly go through, and we were supposed to talk about psyops this whole time. Let, let me just quickly go through NIH, there's CDC, Center for Disease Control, the FDA, the HHS. What are these? What is that structure and how do they all fit together? It seems like there's overlap.
Yeah, well, there is. There's aggressive mission creep within those branches of HHS. So the umbrella organization that is a cabinet level position that Bobby Kennedy has been nominated is Secretary of HHS. HHS is, I'm not clear, there's like three big items in the federal budget, and then everything else is the seven dwarfs. Uh, the big items are the federal debt, payment on the federal debt. That's moving into the position of being the number one budget line item in the federal
Yeah,
government. It's
that's
just
scary.
maintaining the debt. Uh, then we have DOD and HHS, and I'm not sure. I think DOD is bigger than HHS, and then everything else below that. And so HHS is massive because it involves Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMMS, which is now, in addition to CDC, FDA, NIH, and a lot of other agencies. But those are the big kahunas. And Bobby historically is focused on FDA, CDC, NIH, and USDA, which is a separate cabinet level entity, and the need to reform. That's the whole Make America Healthy Again is kind of the socket between these HHS agencies that sit underneath the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Another one is BARDA. They're the ones that issue the big awards for vaccine manufacturing and development, among others, the
What is that
multi-hundred million
called
dollar.
again? I think I read about that in your book.
Yeah, the BARDA is biologic, let's see, what is it? What's the acronym? Biologic Advanced Development and Management, BAR, and Research Activity, I think is what it was. Um, they're not an agency formally, or they weren't, and then something seems to have changed under um, uh, Biden-Harris. So there's a number of these entities that sit below the
So you've got
Secretary.
HHS, Health and Human Services. The Secretary of HHS is going to be Bobby Kennedy. I refuse to accept anything less. Then you have these other agencies, some of which are sub-agencies or within the Department of HHS. But the USDA is not.
Right, USDA is a separate cabinet level position, Secretary of Agriculture.
Okay, Secretary of Agriculture, but NIH, CDC, FDA, and BARA or BARTA, whatever.
BARDA, or it's been renamed ASPR.
Asper. Oh, I
Um,
saw that
uh,
too.
so BARDA is with underneath ASPR. ASPR used to be the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response
No.
that reported to the Secretary of HHS. Um, so BART
But
is just one example. It's the biodefense big money contracts, 100 million, 200 million, half a billion dollar contracts, kind of stuff.
is CDC
Um,
the only one of these agencies that is not congressionally authorized?
to the best of my knowledge, I'm not
Would you get
aware. I
rid
think
of
the rest
it?
are authorized. Pardon?
Would you get rid of it entirely?
CDC? Uh, so I don't want to second guess the administration, but there's a good case to be made that the functional parts of CDC that should exist can be readily bundled under NIH and FDA. So what I would do if you know, Aaron Siri came to me and said, Bobby wants you to advise us on how to streamline things and reduce redundancy. I would say the data gathering function, particularly as it relates to drug effects, et cetera, a lot of that ought to be wrapped into FDA and strengthened. And then the public health surveillance ought to be under NIH. And I think CDC can go away. CDC was originally created, the reason why it's in Atlanta as opposed to DC is because it was originally set up there for malaria control. And malaria at the time, this is back in the 30s and 40s, was also a euphemism for sexually transmitted diseases. When you had syphilis, your doctor wouldn't say you have syphilis. They would say you have malaria. It was just kind of a kinder and gentler, yeah, socially acceptable because it doesn't have all the social overlay of sexually transmitted disease. And so the CDC was set up originally for malaria containment in the South because the mosquitoes were there and there was a lot of STD down there. And that's why the CDC were the ones that ended up administering the Tuskegee, the notorious Tuskegee experiment that has resulted in African Americans throughout North America being completely distrustful of federal government health policy.
If we shut down the CDC, you could, I don't know how many people work there, but that's one way to entirely eliminate thousands and tens.
I think that you could make a case to get rid of CDC and wrap its essential functions under NIH and FDA.
Okay. That I 100% agree with you. Would you move then they move out of Atlanta entirely because it's no longer there. And I'd
And
say,
give the facilities to Emory. They're right next door to Emory and
oh,
just say, hey, Emory, here's our gift to you.
I think that that's a great idea. And then we send the NIH and the FDA out into the hinterlands or to not to the hinterlands, into the Midwest someplace. And then a bunch of people quit. What do you think is the most corrupt of those agencies that are hurting the American people in a very real way?
Hard call. I probably, if you held a gun to my head, would have to say FDA.
Okay. All right. So that's
The NIH corruption is kind of a soft and squishy one, and it involves things like the Bayh-Dole Act, which many of us have become familiar with. I've been familiar with it since its inception, but this is the congressional act which makes it so that federally funded researchers, and then that was reinterpreted to include federal employees, get funding. They get basically um, paid a percentage of the royalties on any patents that they contribute to.
that really upsets me. With the first time I heard it
A lot of
several years
Yeah,
ago,
and
and
it creates a situation that you alluded to it earlier, wherein the NIH is in the position of picking winners and losers, and the people that are busy picking winners and losers are involved, particularly the senior management, are beneficiaries of the patent royalty revenue, either directly or indirectly. And so they have a overt conflict of interest to support those technologies or research findings that are aligned with their intellectual property positions. And what's happened, explicitly what's happened in NIH, you can track this as a very open. They talk about it as a major problem, but they never do anything about it. What's happened is that research funding at NIH has accumulated to older and older, larger and larger investigator teams. So basically, you end up with old men mostly that run massive laboratories staffed by what are functionally indentured servants. They call them postdocs. And all the innovation historically in the biologic sciences tends to come from younger people, like myself when I was 28. But those people have no power. All the power and all the money is controlled by these old guys that run these massive laboratories. And that is just, when you look at what's happening at NIH in terms of innovation and productivity, as this trend has developed, the innovation and productivity that we, the public, are getting out of our research and development investment, and this isn't just NIH, it cuts across the entire federal government, is really compromised by these dynamics of that are kind of political and normal. You can think of this as the normal course of events in development of a bureaucratic structure where power accumulates with around individuals, and particularly elderly individuals that have been able to build an empire. And they function, you can see it with Tony Fauci is just the most obvious example. They are run like little mafias. And these guys are like a mafioso don that run these things. And they have their network of people that have come through their laboratory that function as supporters, and they share information, they share insights, they share submitted manuscripts or grants. Just to illustrate the point, when I was a young man at the Salk Institute, this, ivory tower bastion on the shores of La Jolla, overlooking the cliffs, founded by Jonas Salk and the March of Dimes money, my mentor, who subsequently became director of the Salk Institute and the editor-in-chief of Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, came to me at one point as a graduate student and said, here's a stack of grants that I've received to review. I want you to read them and get ideas. Now, anybody that understands the integrity that's necessary in the peer review system will be blown away by that. But that is the norm now, is that these guys, as they accumulate their power, they use it to gain advantage over their competitors through a whole lot of various kind of nefarious schemes that have developed.
Well, all
And
I want is I want that just shredded. Utterly.
amen.
Is that a law? Is that law where
No,
they have
it's
patent royalties?
administrative policy. It's the consequence of years and years and years of these guys embedding themselves in the system and developing policies that advantage them and disadvantage those that lack standing, status, and power in the biomedical research and development establishment. And as I say, it occurs. It's not just biomed. It's just that happens to be what I know. It cuts across all of these areas. This is one of the reasons why I ended up working so closely, and I'm criticized all the time by the nattering nabobs for having worked with DOD, but DOD R&D is compared to NIH, where the goal with NIH is to publish a paper and get a Nobel Prize. That's the big kahuna. In the DOD, people are genuinely driven to develop products and technologies that support the warfighter mission. All the incentives are wrapped around that.
So there
And
has
they
to be
do things.
quantifiable results and success, and you've got an end goal.
Yeah, and you want to see something that's deployed in the field that is going to help the warfighter, whether it's a vaccine or it's some new armament or a tank or whatever the thing is. And of course, that's gotten distorted by various ways with the military-industrial complex, but still at the ground level, in my experience of 30 plus years, I would way rather be working with DOD R&D scientists than with NIH-funded or academic R&D scientists, because I frankly, I'm aware that I'm not immortal, and if I'm going to put labor into something, I'd like it to see it mature into something other than some academic publication that goes on PubMed. I'd like to see it turned into a product that's actually going to help somebody.
Right. That is the point. And so this patent royalty revenue sharing system, when I heard it, I mean, this was years ago, obviously now, it just killed me because that
It's done
alone,
for all the right reasons. This is a great example of blowback. So The logic was the American public is spending all this money on supporting academic R&D. And yet the culture of academia was that if you worked with industry back in the day, if you worked with industry or you filed patents, then you were somehow contaminated. You were a bad person. You weren't true blue, just working for the benefit of humanity, which is a construction. It's a narrative that's not really valid in academia. But in any case, that was the narrative. And if you were filing patents or working with industry, then you were somehow dirty and contaminated. And so the Congress and Birchby and Dole, the former presidential candidate, came up with, co-sponsored this bill that would make it so that people engaged in federally sponsored research and development activities that came up with patentable insights or discoveries would be incentivized to advocate that their university files patents on this stuff. And they incentivize the universities too, by the way, the deans and the department heads and everything, they all get a slice out of the money. But that by structuring this so that there were these financial incentives and obligations. So the way it works is that a academic comes up with some new widget or some discovery, and they file an invention disclosure, and it goes up to the Technology Transfer Office. The Technology Transfer Office looks at it and says, nobody's going to license this. Or if they say, we don't want to spend the money on filing this patent, then they have to give the rights back to the academic. That's the way the law reads. Or if they decide to file the patent and seek some licensee, then the money that comes back flows down in part to that academic. And so the academic is incentivized to take the time, because you're not going to get tenure from having patents. Tenure comes from other things. And so this incentivized people. What happened in that structure is that then it was extended to government employees, and there's a nuance to that. The way the law was written is that with government employees, the royalty rates that go back to the inventor that's a government employee are negotiated. So one way to fix that without having to get Congress involved is to just renegotiate the rates that the government employees get to zero. Okay, and we'll get rid of that problem. But that was why it was put in place, was the belief that the economic development benefit of all of this federal R&D money that was being pushed out to the academics was not being realized. And so let's incentivize the universities and the academics to file patents, which industry can then license, which industry can then use to build new businesses.
There is so
And
much corruption
they'll get
here,
happily
because
ever
if then aren't they approving the very drugs that they're going to benefit from? Would be like Pfizer
after.
approving
Precisely.
themselves.
Well, so to get into a case example, you have the Vaccine Research Center, the Dale and Betty Bumpers Vaccine Research Center, funded, originally organized by David Baltimore, and impaneled under Tony Fauci as a basically modeled after the biotech company that I used to work at called Vical. So they said, well, let's create a Vical-like entity, Vical being a San Diego gene therapy and genetic vaccine company. Let's create a Vical-like company within NIH, and we're going to get independent sponsorship for that. That's the gift from Dale and Betty Bumpers. Then they got the name there. And let's hire a bunch of people to basically develop new vaccines using the latest gene therapy tech like adenoviruses. And we'll put it under Tony Fauci's direction. And they will invent new vaccines specifically for AIDS. Well, they failed AIDS, never did come up with an AIDS vaccine. And all the other vaccines that they've tried to develop, Ebola, influenza, it goes on and on, West Nile virus, have all failed. every time one of these infectious disease pops up, Tony Fauci goes to Congress, and literally you can almost superimpose his testimony if you go back into C-SPAN. Every time one of these cycles of fear around an infectious disease kicks up, Tony Fauci would go to Congress and say, as their electorate is getting spun up by the media, Tony Fauci would go to Congress and testify and say, basically, paraphrasing, I will end your pain of your alarmed voters if you only give me $100 million, $200 million, $250, $300 million, whatever the number is, and I will have a vaccine for you within 2 to 3 years. You'd say it again and again and again. Never the vaccine, never any accountability, never any follow-up by Congress, but they just see that then they allocate the $250 million to Tony Fauci to solve their pain. The press announces with great fanfare, it's great. We're no longer going to have this crisis of public health because Congress has allocated $250 million to Tony Fauci. And then Tony Fauci pushes it out through the network of, congressional districts and academics, and nothing ever comes of it.
Robert,
So that's
don't
been
we
the
have to
three.
just burn it down? I mean, let me say that there are so many elements to
There,
this that
there's a
it's,
strong logic for taking the Javier Milei approach,
yeah,
uh, uh, but
because
we have to be
there's
careful
no
to not.
way that I think you had a line in your book, which we have virtually not even discussed, where you say something like, talking about making small incremental or adjustments and changes, but we don't believe in fantasies. Is that in your book? Because I think I read it last night. Or we don't believe in fairy tales. And,
Yeah.
we're beyond that. I think that was your book. It's the only book I read last night. Um, and but I don't believe in fairy tales. I do not believe that it is even remotely possible that the corruption that has been built over these many, many decades, the SES, the royalties, it makes me angry, and the American people are angry. And in 4 years or 8 years or 12, the Dems or some other monster are going to be back in office, and they're going to reverse anything that is easily reversible and try to start building again. And unless we take it down to the foundation and then jackhammer up the foundation, don't even leave, get a new
And there's
hole to.
no way. So this was the focus of the essay that I wrote, that I've been attacked for, regarding the transition team in HHS, and the appointments that are coming down. Um, my assessment is that, um, in the next 4 years, the best we can hope for is progress at the margins. As you point out, these things are so deeply embedded, and I'm fully aware that a number of these appointments are involving quid pro quos. The ones that a lot of people are finding particularly egregious. There's a lot of horse trading going on, among other things, in order to get Bobby confirmed. So senators right now have a lot of leverage to get whoever it is that they want into position X, Y, or Z. And that's just the nature of DC. It's the way that power works in the imperial state. And what, as you can tell from the subtext in the title, I've come to the conclusion that the bigger threat to those who wish to make America great again is not just this entrenched deep state and administrative state. And by the way, I strongly recommend reading Kash Patel's book about. Yeah, that was a real good one, as far as I'm concerned. I quoted in the book, but The real threat is this movement towards a single world government that is functionally socialist, is being created intentionally and methodically with support of the left in particular through international treaties like the Agenda 2030, which is now is considered a signed treaty because Obama endorsed it and the Senate did nothing, or the Pact for the Future that just passed. Uh, um, the UN and this is literally the case. There is a partnership between the United Nations and the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum is corporatist and the United Nations is socialist. So you have a pact between the socialists and the corporatists. And I make the case that that meets the formal political science definition as opposed to the distorted term that is weaponized by the press. That meets the formal political science definition of fascism. And it's modern fascism. Fascism isn't the same in every embodiment, just like totalitarianism. It's never the same. But this fusion of corporatism, as reflected by this trade union of the 1,000 largest companies in the world, which is the World Economic Forum, and this organization that is overtly socialist. It's led by the former head of the Socialist International, the former head of the Socialist Party in Portugal. That United Nations is socialist, and it seeks, like for instance, in their Pact for the Future, they say specifically, we have the best plans. Those best plans include green energy, DEI, ESG, etc. They've never been tested, but they assert that they have the best plans and they have the right to unilaterally impose them on the rest of the world and to drive the world towards a centralized planned economy governed by the United Nations together with their World Economic Forum partners. And sitting above that are these global public-private partnerships that set policy goals and objectives. So that's the new structure, and we do talk about this in the book extensively, particularly in the last third. And it's all modeled based on the current structure in the European Union, in which the head of the European Union, Ursula von der Leyen, and the European Council, which makes all the executive decisions in the European Union and has the ability to override any of the national governments that constitute the European Union, the Bundestag, for example, in Germany, if they come up with a new law or position that benefits the German people, that can be easily overridden by the European Council, which is unelected, it's appointed. And so that's the model for the one world government structure that is proposed by the UN together with their partners, the World Economic Forum. So in terms of the spectrum of bad stuff to be worried about, in terms of maintaining our own sovereignty, not just as individuals, but as a nation state, that is a much bigger threat as far as I'm concerned. The administrative state and the deep state are a pain in the keister, and they are responsible for this kind of chronic overspending, inability to stick to a budget, the mission creep, all of these things, the excessive authoritarian and totalitarian administrative policies. But compared, in just to give an example, flying the German flag in Germany now is akin to Proud Boys waving a swastika here in the United States. If you fly the German flag, you are considered to be a fascist. If you speak about German nationalism, like the Alliance for Deutschland does, AfD in Germany, the leading opposition party, has been outlawed, and fundraising for AfD has been outlawed by the German state. That's and of course we have Keir Starmer in UK. We have Marine Le Pen and what's gone on in France, and the kind of slightly glowing, I don't want to say bright light, in the Euro experiment is Giorgia Meloni down in Italy, but they basically kneecapped Giorgia Meloni almost immediately after she was elected by basically the bond market, the same way that the Great British government got kneecapped. Uh, um, Basically, the bond market informed Giorgia Meloni that her policies and positions that she got elected for, if she went to implement them, they would collapse the Italian economy. And they have the power to do so. That basically the bond market and the major transnational investor groups like BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard rule the world. They rule the world economically, and the politicians and national governments are secondary. They have to basically kowtow and bootlick the big finance, and it's big finance that is setting the policy. It's big finance that's making the decisions about who gets elected, about what policies are advanced, what the candidates are. Again, once again, I'm reminded of George Carlin, who I'm not allowed to quote because he has a very effective uh, um, group that will prosecute people for unauthorized attribution. But um, it's a big club, and you're not part of it. The situation is such that these large transnationals are in control, and they have the power to allow the United States to continue to exist as it does right now, so long as the U.S. advances their geopolitical interests and maintains the fiat currency that they use right now, et cetera. This is one of the reasons why, I don't want to in any way imply that Putin is a good guy, but that Russia is so vilified is because Russia won't play the game. Uh, they're resisting this centralized planned economy. How ironic that people that used to form the Soviet Union are um, aware of the pitfalls of a centralized planned economy,
He
and they don't
doesn't
want anything to do
exactly.
with
He doesn't want globalism. I'm no Putin fan, but I'm also no. I just think it's absolutely absurd to, if you affirm anything that Putin does or believes, or Russia does or believes, or you criticize Zelensky somehow, or Ukraine somehow, you are, I don't know, uh, a Russian sympathizer. Is just so weird. Don't you? Let me ask you
it.
this though.
That's another PsyWar narrative.
Yeah, it is a PsyWar narrative. But the thing that I think many people on the outside of well, firstly, I will say this, that I agree that the international globalist elite, that the EU, the UN, World Health Organization, WEF, all of these organizations, I think that much of the problem can be addressed first and foremost with executive orders, because that's far more international treaties. I mean, any international
Yeah,
relationships.
I agree that the executive branch has enormous power to set international policy. It is, I think, so to your point, um, I think that it is one of the great opportunities for the Trump administration that uh, it's a theater for governance and administration in which they will have relatively little interference by the legislative branch, by Congress. And I hope, and that was one of my conclusions in the essay, is um, it's going to be wicked hard uh, for Trump administration to make a significant impact on these problems of the deep state and the administrative state. But um, I'm hopeful, and of course I'm disappointed, but I endorsed him anyhow. I anticipated that Trump was not going to uh, acknowledge, let's say, the harms associated with the genetic vaccines uh, and the mismanagement, et cetera, that occurred under his watch having to do with COVID. He's dug in on that. And despite that, even though that's one of my primary issues, I endorsed him before Bobby did because of his other positions and the obvious uh, alternative being Harris, Walls, and these socialist Marxist policies that they've been pursuing and advocating for. Obviously, Trump was the choice, but I think that there's a high probability that Trump will act um, against the interests of the globalists. And as example number one to support the thesis, you had Yuval Harari before the election, the ostensible chief scientific officer of the World Economic Forum, who notably asserts that man is now God.
Is that
Uh,
his book, Homo Deus or something?
yeah,
Which book did he say?
exactly.
I
Homo Deus.
the
Yeah.
whole I have not read one of his books because I know I would just toss it aside 3 minutes after.
Yeah. Yeah. So, any case, Yuval Harari made the statement that if Trump gets in, it's going to be a huge setback for the World Economic Forum and for transhumanism. And I hope that he's right. Many on my side saw that as an endorsement
Yeah,
of Trump,
exactly.
but
But do you see, I
that
know what
I,
you're
I
I am
think that we
completely obsessed about the international scope, the globalism, the UN, the World Economic Forum. I agree 100% with you that this is the ultimate goal is to consolidate power and have a controlled economy and governance, and that is a nightmare. But if we only I'm not saying you don't believe it's possible, but I believe that it can happen, that we dismantle the deep state because a lot of it's about smart
we
people being
we had
innovative.
100 Cash Patels with expertise in these different silos. Maybe. And Trump was like pedal to the metal, let's go. Um, and fully committed. Uh, and we weren't having this noise of usual politics going on. We might see a major change over the next 4 years. But that is not what's happened. We do not have 100 Cash Patels. If we had somebody like that with his knowledge of the inner workings of the FBI and how nefarious that is, if we had somebody like that for CDC, FDA, NIH, CMMS, but instead what we've got for CMMS is Dr. Oz. For what we have for FDA and NIH are two academics with no real experience in the federal government. One from um, Johns Hopkins, the FDA, and one from Stanford, NIH. These are not people that are experienced managers. They're not experienced in the ways the government works. They're not experienced in the various nefarious ways that the senior executive service is going to be planting knives in their backs. But they were the ones that got selected. And we learned how that selection occurred with a tweet from Del Bigtree in which he, poses the hypothetical question, should Bobby Kennedy appoint um, these people that have been so outspoken and have been labeled as anti-vaccine by the press, or should we appoint people that are more centrist, that aren't going to be attacked by the press in the same way, and are more likely to be confirmed? And that's what they're doing. Is basically the press has already intimidated the administration and the transition teams by attacking Matt Gaetz and now the Secretary of Defense. Tulsi Gabbard is just about up. She's going to be in the barrel. Bobby Kennedy, obviously. That what's happening is the press has already succeeded in serving their masters, in vilifying these people, uh, and getting the transition teams to back off and appoint people that are less controversial. And that's the setup. That's where this is going. Is we have people that are less controversial being appointed rather than uh, battle-hardened people like Kash Patel, and we are having this kind of quid pro quo. Uh, Politics as usual to appoint this, that, or the other person in exchange for Senate confirmation of this or that other person. That's how it's playing out right now, and that's why I'm not very sanguine about what we're going to see domestically over the next 4 years. Is we're not seeing an administrative group that is committed to girding their loins and going to battle, as Steve Bannon might say. And I was on Bannon a few days ago, and then yesterday with Natalie Winter, she kind of put me on the spot about what I thought about the appointments, and I was I had to speak truth, and I'm not particularly optimistic because we're not seeing people put into these positions that are ready to go to the mat.
Well, that's a big problem because the American people are getting up every morning, I think, and thinking we're going to be set free here. That there's going to be slash
Which is
and burn
exactly
and
what I warned about this before the election. Is we're getting, you need to, in the run up to the election, you need to get the base fired up. You need to get people enthusiastic. You need to have a belief that their interests are being heard and there will be change. But the downside to doing that, to throwing the red meat and talking about reform, et cetera, is that you will have disillusionment if you fail to follow through. And I fear that so hence what I've been writing in Substack is basically, guys and gals, MAGA and MAGA have an intrinsic logic that transcends this administration. This administration is going to move the ball downfield, but we're not going to score a bunch of touchdowns here. We're going to see improvements, but we have to have a sustained decades-long effort if we're going to win this battle and truly make America great again. To bring America back is not something that can happen in just 4 years
okay,
because of all
okay,
of these
that's
different.
okay. There we can be closing on this realm because what you're saying is that as we it's not that we can't accomplish eventually. This is my interpretation. You can correct me, but it's not that we can't accomplish the goals. And that to me is burning it to the ground, rebuilding it from the rooting out all the corruption. And when I say corruption proofing and all that, I do know that men are fallen creatures in a fallen world. I do know that sin still abounds. And I mean, I have my theology straight there, but I will say this, that there are nations and organizations and companies and families, whatever, that are rife with sin and greed and envy and avarice and a
You don't
desire
believe
for
it? Look at Epstein Island. You
right.
know, as I tweeted out the other day, here's what I really want to know. What did Bill Gates know and when did he know it?
We should have that hearing. Um, and by the way, reading about the church committee was a real eye opener to me. But I know that this
Operation Mockingbird.
we have not possibly even gone to the deep psyops, which I will say this. By the way, let me say this before we move into this last place where we're just going to sum things up. The book, I told Robert before we started that it was the first chapter. Thank you. Thank you. You have the book. Um, Okay, here, I'm holding mine up. Anyway, the first chapter was worth the price of the book because it just reoriented myself. It's not that I don't pay attention to these things, obviously, but psyops and cyber warfare, I need to go more deeply in and understand the breadth and depth of the problem. And I thought, this is the kind of book that is doing that. And I went through an audiobook last night, and I would love to talk because we didn't do it here. It's your fault. We didn't go deep into not
I
chapter
talked
by chapter, but into the topic. But let me go back. So psyops is a book worthy to read. Buy it, read it. It's an important book. And I but to draw a close on what we actually talked about, and that is this next 4 years, um, you are saying in a different way the very thing that I've been saying, and that is that we have to harden our defenses. We have to harden the
absolutely.
preventative, the bulwarks and the ramparts and whatever other metaphor you want to use, and build the walls, because in 4 years, if it can all be redone again, or 8 or 12, they will do it again. So we have
Yeah,
to commit to the long play, the long game, and that's JD Vance or whomever that takes the
I agree.
baton then. And so it's not a negative thing, even though it sounds a little depressing the way you're going at it, Robert. Um, it doesn't, because we just want victory. I want the game to end with a victory, and I want to do it in the next 4 years. But we can. Do you disagree with me that we can achieve this? The founding fathers did almost 250 years ago.
I think it is achievable. But so let me give you a cautionary note to inform all of us. In I think that, in the book I talk about the importance of family, faith, community, etc., um, as the way forward, but that we're going to have to basically recommit to the fundamentals and tunnel through the next decade, which is going to be tough. It's not going to be a pretty picture. And we've got a lot of things going on that are not aligned with freedom and sovereignty. But we can make it through. I'm reminded of the immortal words of General Flynn, who wrote the introduction to the book. Things are bad now; they're going to get worse, and we win in the end. It's a reference to biblical teaching. Um, uh, and I've written about this also. For those of us that are members of the community of faith, particularly Judeo-Christian ethic, um, remember that we don't know the plan, and we are now entering. There's a time for everything, right? A season for all things, and this is a season for testing. In my opinion, this is a season where we get to learn who's just talks the talk and who actually walks the walk. And that's important. We need to have that. And we don't know what the grand plan is. There will be setbacks, but those setbacks may actually be helpful in the long run when we look back on them, just like adversity often hardens us and strengthens us. And so if you have your faith in a higher power, in God, then uh, release some of that tension and anxiety that you have over what you see in the daily news about what's going on in DC
Don't
and the
let the
back and
news
forth.
cycle change your
And
heart
and
and ruin your mind.
have have faith that this is going to come to a head. But the cautionary note, I don't know if you know Jenny Beth Martin. I consider her a great friend. She is one of the real movers and shakers in what remains of the Tea Party patriots. She just worked like a dog. She worked super hard with Get Out the Vote and with ensuring election integrity. She's just an amazing woman. Works hard day after day after day. And but she represents the Tea Party Patriots group. She may be, the core of what's left of it. And that movement um, petered out. It has not fulfilled its potential. It had so much potential, so much energy. And then it's, what was the last time you thought about it?
My husband was a
And
keynote speaker at the Tea Party down in Nashville, that big conference. And so the last time I thought about it is because somebody showed me a clip to his video, but you're right. I've always wondered what happened to the Tea Party patriots.
so don't let that happen to us. Um, we have to build, this buzzword that the left likes to throw around, sustainability. Well, we need to be sustainable. We need to maintain our integrity. We need to strengthen our community. We need to reinvest and commit to family, our partners, our children, the people around us, our communities of faith, your church, whatever your structure is. That it's the fragmentation of society and the fragmentation of the individual from society that lets the totalitarian authoritarianism slip in. That's the teaching of Matthias Desmond about mass formation. The real problem is the sense of futility, frustration, alienation, isolation. As human beings, we have this deep, deep need to be connected to each other. Humans, I live on a farm. I'm horse farm with ducks and chickens and stuff like that. I'm very aware of herd and flock. Um, and humans are like that too. We need to be connected to our fellow human beings. And when we do that, that's one of the reasons why the communities of faith that were able to stay strong during the COVID crisis were so resistant to the propaganda is by having a community of people that maintained their cohesion and integrity. They become very resistant to these methods that seek to control everything, all information you encounter, everything you think, everything you feel, everything you believe is being actively manipulated on a daily basis anytime you engage in media, particularly online media. And by having a strong community and family, etc., you become much, much more resistant to the ability of outside influence to control what you're thinking and believing. And so that's my mission to all of us is to learn what just happened over the last 4 years. Take a look at that. That's what the book's about. Understand their tech and things like surveillance capitalism and psychological bioterrorism and all these things that we go into details, techno-totalitarianism. Learn about how that works, how that ecosystem works, become resistant to it, and figure out how to, build sustainability going forward so that as this all passes through our lives over the next decade or 2 decades, because remember, this has been going on for a century, building up to this. As we, if we stay strong, stay focused, and educate ourselves about the tools and tricks of our opponents, then I think we have a decent chance of coming out of this stronger and in control of our own nation state. But if we take our eye off the ball and we start whining about this, that, and the other thing, the suck it up, snowflake, cowboy up kind of attitude, we got to cowboy up, and we gotta focus on the future, protect the future for our families and our children, and don't give up just because we may lose a skirmish. We just won a major battle, but we absolutely didn't win the war.
That is very, very well said, and I appreciate it. And say hello to your wife because I want to interview her as well if she's willing to do interviews. I haven't seen her out there,
Yeah, she
but
does occasionally.
she does.
She's Yeah, she doesn't like the spotlight, bless her heart. But over the last 4 years, she's really come out in many ways, and I encourage you to line up an interview with
I
her.
will, I will. And, the work on this book was really, really important by both of you. Like I said, I highly recommend it because PsyOps is the war of the future. It's not kinetic war. I mean, that too, but it's
Yeah,
it's a
fifth
war
generation
that
warfare.
it's a
It's core part
PsyOps.
of NATO, core part of NATO battlefield philosophy now is psychological warfare.
Right. And now, but it's being turned back upon us. And now I understand, it actually just made me think about why NATO and EU and England and or UK and all this are so hysterical about Trump and Elon, et cetera, because there's a house of cards. It's built on psyops or psywar, and it could literally come tumbling down if
Yeah.
God blesses us and we make the right moves and do so with integrity and
That's why I do everything I can to support these center-right populist movements all across the world.
agreed.
It's left in Tokyo. I've spent a stupid amount of time in Romania, France, Italy in particular, Germany to some extent, Britain with Andrew Bridgen, um, and I will continue to do so to the best of my ability. I think we have to support our
I
brothers and
very
sisters.
much agree. On my X, I'm reposting stories from around the world every single day as much as I am American.